How important is nonverbal communication? Keep watching. I'm Damon Cart, this is Life Mastery Gym, and I teach people just like you cutting-edge NLP processes and techniques so that you can master your life and take charge of your destiny. So if that sounds good, make sure you click that subscribe button right down here so you can get these videos on a regular basis. What you're about to watch is an interview that I did with Micheal Grinder on the power of nonverbal communication. So we really dive deep into why this is so important. And if you want to take this deeper, if you would like to cultivate better sensory acuity and calibration skills so that you can spot what not other people's nonverbal communication is communicating, there's a link right here down below. You click that link and you will get a 30-day free training on sensory acuity and calibration. It's one of the most important skills you will need in order to master NLP and, more importantly, to master persuasion and influence. Okay, welcome. I am very excited to be interviewing Micheal Grinder. And just so we avoid any confusion, some people might see Grinder and then automatically think that you're your brother. So we want to avoid that. You are John Grinder's brother, and John Grinder being one of the co-founders of NLP. Yes. So welcome, Micheal Grinder. It's wonderful to have you.
When I first started presenting for John, I knew that I couldn't compete with him. So I introduced myself as Micheal Grinder, the brother of John Grinder, just to clarify that. So if you want to use that, feel free to.
Oh, I hear people make that mistake all the time when they're talking about John Grinder. It's usually when people are not very familiar with NLP and they say John Grinder, and I'm like, no, it's Grinder. I think Grinder sounds so much better than Grinder.
It does.
So, yeah. Well, the main reason why I'm really excited, like I mentioned when we talked previously, you were on my list for a while to train with and to eventually, meet and talk to, because whenever I started my NLP training, one thing that I realized very quickly is how powerful nonverbal communication is. And I think a lot of people in NLP, when they first start training in this, in NLP, they spend maybe a day on sort of the nonverbal, the sensory acuity, the calibration, and then you move on, and you're kind of left to sort it out by yourself. And I did, which was kind of a painful, long, drawn-out process. I didn't have somebody to teach you along the way. Yeah. But the power in it was amazing once you start tapping into it. And then, and it's not just me, it's not just you saying this. You have authors like Robert Greene, author of Mastery and The Art of Seduction, who says, man, when you understand nonverbal communication, that is where it's at. Nonverbal communication doesn't lie, not like, like your words, you can lie. You can't do that with nonverbal communication. And it's the majority of how we communicate. So very exciting to have you here. And so I want to start off by hearing how you got into this. I mean, obviously the doorway into NLP and all that, I'm sure came from your brother, John. But how did you make that evolution from that to where you are now and what you teach?
Well, the family joke, which I perpetuate, is that if you have an older brother that has a PhD in linguistics, don't go there. Let's go somewhere else. So I ended up in nonverbals. That's the joke. The reality of it was my first career was as a teacher, high school level. And what I found was as I took NLP, I was also being trained personally by Carl Rogers, the great humanitarian. And so I had two different ways of thinking about how you change people. I found that I couldn't get either one of them to work with teachers that I trained because they're in a group setting. And initially, NLP was mostly one-on-one. It has evolved and morphed, and now we do sales, we do presentation, we do consultation. So it's moved towards both one-on-one as well as a group. But initially, I just cannot work with people one-on-one when they're teachers and they're in front of a class of 35. You don't have time to work one-on-one. So I had to figure out, well, what's the essence of what I learned from NLP that I could apply to teachers. And what I found was NLP taught me how to observe. So using the modeling process, started watching the best teachers, figuring out what's going on. And even when I had a good day, I went, why is that so good? So that's the morph from NLP over to nonverbals to group dynamics.
Okay. And tell me, maybe it wasn't something, an incredible moment, because like a lot of times we think of like, well, that was probably an incredible moment, but then to hear the story sometimes it's not so incredible. But let me ask you, that moment where you realize, wait a minute, nonverbal communication is really being overlooked, and this is really the biggest chunk of communication. So was there like a moment you realized that, or was it just like a long drawn out process of gradually working into that?
Well, what I found was teachers tend to shy then as well as now from any internal sanctuary. So in terms of talking about your mental state, how you control yourself, changing people from the inside out, which is NLP, is more and more powerful than changing people from the outside in, which is nonverbals. So I had to sacrifice a more powerful model for a model that is more acceptable. So when I work with people now and they're okay with either one, I'm going to use the inside out model. But for the majority of people, I choose the outside in. And what I mean by that is if you change someone's appearance or behaviors or styles or value or core, you're going from the outside in. If you change people from the inside out, you're going the opposite way. Both are really good. One is more acceptable, one is more powerful.
Okay. So for people who may be hearing this for the first time, who aren't aware of how powerful nonverbal communication is, what would you tell that person, why it's so important to learn this? What can it do for them, maybe in a professional way, but also, this is Life Mastery Gym. So we like to think about, how do we master our lives in every area, and not just in business and success and accomplishments, but also in overall fulfillment.
Yeah, agree. If you would, research out there, not mine, says that about 80 to 90% of your message is nonverbal. So if you want to be congruent, sincere, authentic, real, all of those things are going to force you towards, are your nonverbal supporting your verbal? For instance, if I go ahead and talk with you and my hands are at my side or on my lap right now and I talk very fast, what I'm doing, I'm becoming an incessant talker. When I'm an incessant talker, I'm afraid that if I pause at all, someone's going to interrupt me and I'll lose control of what's going on. So I'm going to continue to go like this, and I'm going to memorize everything I've already rehearsed and just what I'm going to say. But what happens is I come across as not very confident, competent, or intelligent. If I use my hands and I move my hands as I talk, and then when I come to a pause, wherever the hand is, I leave it still until I talk again. Then everything I said before the pause and everything I say after the pause is connected. So now I have if you want to call it, an integrated message, and people believe me more.
Nice. Can you give us maybe examples of famous leaders or anyone of prominence who you think is a good example, or good examples of people who communicate very well nonverbally?
Well, my wife does. I admire how she just talks. When we get together pre-COVID and hopefully post-COVID, it's always amazing that everyone looks over at grandma and talks to her. And every once in a while, about third or fourth sentence of their update, they'll look over at me and go, "And you too, grandpa." And I realize, man, I've got to watch what she nods her head. She's highly accepting. There's no judgment. I'm going, man, she's the one who probably should claim she was trained by Carl Rogers, not me, because she just has this unconditional acceptance of communication. Now, she's really good one-on-one up to one-on-three. Put her in a group of 5, she goes quiet because that's not her arena. She wants to go deep into someone's, I want to get to know you on a very deep level. If you went to public speakers, I think Obama is one of the finest we've ever had. And if you just watch him, he has this ability. I can't get away with it yet. He'll look like this off to the side and he'll make some kind of announcement and the hand stays frozen. Then he takes his head, and most people can't do this. He moves it. And then he talks. How does he do that? It violates all the rules I know of public speaking. But when you get to that level, you want to start violating all norms.
Yeah, I agree. So we're not, this isn't political, and we're not taking a political position here by saying that we're only talking about his style of communication. I was going to mention Obama, and and that wins elections. I mean, that communicates so powerfully.
Yeah.
And so again, this is not political. I also wanted to say I find Bill Clinton to be an incredibly great nonverbal communicator, especially with his tonality. Like he controls so much with his voice tonality, and then his hand gestures, which are not very common, but when he does, they're so maybe you can explain this. He does an authoritarian finger point, but at the same time, it sort of feels like when your grandfather used a finger point that felt gentle and friendly and warm. It's like, how do you combine authority with gentleness and warmth? It's amazing to watch.
And if you would, I love to contrast one of my heroes, which is John McCain. If you look at John McCain, anyone who hasn't studied this, go to YouTube and look at his acceptance speech. When he acknowledged that he lost. And that night when he lost, he was breathing so well, he was so calm. I would have voted for him if he'd act that way during the campaign. But he started talking like this. And whenever you get that kind of anger out and your chin goes down or your pupils go high in your eye socket, you either have to trust that person or you have to be afraid. And Bill Clinton never did that. He would take and he'd come off the side of his skull. And he always had that kind of smirky smile right up here. And being a Rhodes Scholar, he knew how smart he was. So it wasn't a question of what to say. It was how to pause it, how to bring it across. And if I may, for anyone who's interested, if you want to be good at public speaking, use your hands and learn to pause. There's more, but those are the two, Damon, that really it starts with.
I agree. I've done different types of communication courses and even had coaches, and they would tell me like I'm speaking way too fast. And they would say, like, go talk to someone, and they would give me like I'd have to go approach a stranger, and they would only say, you can only say 5 things, like only give you 5 sentences. And that was to teach me to pause and to let the other person speak. It is amazing how much somebody will tell you when you just pause. If you give them an opportunity to talk, you don't have to say much. Even if you're there, I think there's this feeling that you got to fill the gaps, you got to fill the void. So you just keep talking nonstop. But if you stop and you just wait, the other person will feel the need to fill that gap. So then you'll have more communication. You'll be able to speak back and forth. So I'm with you 100% on the pauses. Like that can be so incredibly powerful, and not just, I think, in allowing the other person to speak. We were talking about public speakers. I mean, Obama, the pause with Obama's timing, unbelievable, like just perfect almost every time.
I think the best pauser in my opinion in NLP is Judith Delosier.
Yeah, no, she's quite powerful. So she's another example of someone who has that gentle warmth, but but lots of power behind it. And it's like, you're not afraid of her power in that way, because she's always putting it across with gentleness and love every step of the way. So, but you get a sense that like, wow, this is a very powerful person because the way she holds her body. Now, she was a dancer, as you know, for a very long time. So her posture and her breathing is always like really perfect, because she knows how to breathe in sync with her body.
Absolutely. Absolutely. One of the things I love watching her, and this is for people that take and dance, instead of having a gesture come out with the wrists stiff, it almost comes out where it leads and then the rest follows. And that's why it's so graceful. I'm going, whoa, that's gorgeous.
Yeah, and we can't overlook these things. They when you compound them, which is what I want to get to with your house of communication, it's the compounding of things. It's not like the one thing. In fact, people might be listening to this and saying, oh, I need to do that Obama like hand gesture. And if you do that in isolation, it usually doesn't work. It's like saying one word. One word's not going to communicate what you mean. You have to combine it with other words to create a sentence. And body communication or nonverbal communication is the same way. It definitely has to be combined. So let's get into your house of communication, because that's definitely what I really liked about. Now, I just saw one of your videos on your YouTube channel. By the way, we'll link your YouTube channel to this video so that people can see more of what we're talking about. So, I mean, I thought it was a great video because you didn't get into the details yet. Like it gave me kind of an overall view, and after watching it, I was like, I definitely want to learn this. This makes a lot of sense. The other thing that I loved about it is that you do these compounding levels, and it's like, wow, you just know when you hit all of these angles, when you really have a sense of that territory, the power in the communication is just got to be amazing. So would you give us a bit of an overview of your house of communication model?
Real quick. So we have 4 floors in the house. We have the first floor, which is content, the second floor, which is process, the third floor, which is perception and timing, and the fourth floor, which is whether to even try this or not. The first two floors are the science. It indicates always do this, never do that. For instance, public speakers are trained never lose eye contact with your audience. Well, that means when you have a PowerPoint and you're going, here's our next slide, and what you're doing is you're putting them in a bind because your eyes are here and your hand is here. So there's all kinds of always do this, never do this. That's the science. When you get up to the art, which I think is so beautiful, then you have to start violating. And perception, we break into 4 different categories. Whether you're looking and observing one person, 2 people, group dynamics, or a system. And you ask a separate question for each of those. And to me, that was the biggest single moment breakthrough for me, Damon, where I'm going to go, I've been using, when I see 2 people, taking the question that I have with one person, which is what is likely to be that person's values, motivation, perceptual filter, and I was putting it on 2 people. And I realized I couldn't keep up with it. It was just too fast. So I realized, no, you have to have a different perceptual question when you go from a single person to 2 people. And the question when you go to 2 people is who's likely to dominate? And we mean that non-judgmentally, just who's going to influence. So we came up with an understanding of people by transferring your knowledge of household pets. So if you have a dog or a cat, excuse me just a second. So here's a cat. And everyone knows a cat is going to dominate, even if it's smaller than the dog. So if you just take your knowledge of household pets, use that when you watch people, you'll get really good at recognizing who's likely to dominate. When you get over to group dynamics of 3 or 4 more people, do not do what is the motivation, who's going to dominate. You have to have a different kind of question. And that question is going to be, what is likely to happen next? So when you're a trainer, a manager, even the head of a household, please don't try to understand each individual. Don't understand who's likely to dominate. Ask what is likely to happen next, because then you can be proactive.
Now, I got to say, they don't talk about what you're talking about in sales trainings like they should. Because this is very much something that's missing. Sales trainings often deal directly with what you say and how to script it and how to organize it correctly. Not once did I remember being in a sales training, because I used to sell insurance, where they talked about when you're selling like something like life insurance to a couple.
Yeah.
Really got to understand who's dominant there. And I like what you said about it. It's not a value judgment. It's just that one person usually takes the lead. That's just how it is. And sometimes that person will do the least amount of talking. So
Yes.
Don't think that because the one who's doing the most talking is the one who's in control or the one who's leading. It
Right.
doesn't work that way. Have you taught this to sales professionals?
I try to limit to only working with salespeople that have 75% repeat business.
Interesting. And I'm just curious, how did you come to that decision?
Ethics.
So if you're thinking, so if they have repeat business, they must be ethical, therefore.
Yeah. Because if you go back to your 5 circles of appearance, behavior, styles, value, and core, if you're working with the same people over and over, you have to match what are their needs. You can't just sell them on something. Whereas if you go to, and I mean this very respectfully, if you go to a used car dealer, most of the people on that lot have been there under 3 months. So they have no name connection with the company that they're representing. So they're just trying to put bread on their table. Rightly so. Maslow, hierarchy of needs. Come on. Where do I get my bread tonight? So they're going to go with more surface kinds of rapport, not deep permissional rapport. So to me, we sometimes overteach in NLP rapport as immediate, right now, pace lead, mirror match. And I want to suggest that is absolutely right, and do it. But please be careful. That's not the same as permission.
That's interesting. I've never heard it described that way. You called it permission rapport or permissional rapport. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Well, just your two smaller levels outside circles of a human being, what they look like, how they sound like, how they move, how they talk. If you mirror and match all that, you have that. But that's not the same in terms of their needs. So this is social, and that's why salespeople, you try to get 6 yeses. You're from that. I have a cousin that lived there. Yes, and so you try to get lots of commonality. Well, that's fine, and you want to do that, and it's really skillful. But if you're going to use this person as a repeat customer, you best know their insides. What's going on?
Yeah, and that brings me to some questions I want to ask you about values, because I stress values on pretty much everything. But before I do that, when I was watching that video about the House of Communication, loved the compounding part of it, but I felt like, whoa, this seems a little overwhelming to put it all together. So, and I know that when you're communicating, it's like I'm talking right now, like I'm aware of what I'm saying, but I'm not overly thinking. I'm also learning a second language right now, and so I'm translating in my head a lot. And so you can't do that. It has to come like kind of naturally. So when you're communicating in this way and you're observing the House of Communication, immediately what I thought was like, how do you bring this all together and make it automatic? How do you do that?
Practice.
I guess I wanted a little more of like, how do you practice it?
So what we do is we have a product that's called 7 Steps to Mastering Presentation Skills, if that's the area you're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And what it says is, of the 7 steps we have, the first 4 have to do with your hands and pausing, straight out. So if you are not using your hands, you got to start using your hands. Now, once you start using your hands, the question is, do you know when to pause? Because if you don't pause, you can't breathe, they can't breathe, it overwhelms them. So the idea of being able to pause with your hands and then make sure you keep the hands still until you talk again, even one-on-one. The difference is you only can use one hand if the person is fairly close. Do not invade their space. So usually the arm's length is what is the distance for their mental picture. So if you want them to picture something, you can't invade their space. And especially with distant learning, when your hand gets too close to the camera, your hand looks bigger than your head. So you have to gesture all in here. And the smaller the group, the more it's just one hand. After you get good at pausing, then you do what's called a pre and a post pause. So Damon, I'm just giving you some of the steps you can practice with. And if you have something really important, like you want to say to someone, you have such potential. Now watch if I do it with my hand. You have such potential. Now watch if I do it with a pause. You have such potential. Now that's a pre-pause. If after I say it, I keep the hand there, keep my eyes open, no blink, drop the chin down and whisper, I have a major impact. You have such potential. Now you're getting very intimate. You have to have permission to do that. Otherwise, you come across as freaky. You need to know when to. Well, that's the art. So then we get into the idea of being credible, approachable, whether you want to have your palm up, have your palm down, palm sideways. Those are all very, very different communications.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so speaking of the communication, I want to get back to the values, because I stress this often, but I want to hear your take on this. What to you is so important about values in communication?
Long-term sustainability.
So that seems kind of like the broad reason for it. But like if we're in communication, and so where do values fit into how we're communicating?
It'd be, if I can use Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's the deep inside of you. And so when you're deep inside of you, this is what's going to generate everything else. The question that you have, if this was your 5 circles of humanness and someone else's 5 circles of humanness, the question is 2. One is, what level do I want to share? And what level do I want to engage with? You've got to match it, because if I have a very important day and my wife is out and about and I want to talk with her about what a great day I've had, I want to talk about, wow, this was really a fulfilling day. If I don't ask her to start with, do you have time? she will only want to be on the surface level. I'm in traffic right now. I've got to get home. And so you're mismatching. So you've got to make sure that if you want to go to value, you've got to have time. If you don't have time, don't even try it. Then if you do have time, you still have to figure out, do you have permission? And I know you're going to ask me next, well, how do you know if you have permission? You use a teeter-totter, if I may. If the other person is breathing high, you have low permission. If the other person is breathing low, you have high permission. And that's cross-cultural.
Yeah, that's another, I'm glad you said that too, because that's another very important part of nonverbal communication is it doesn't matter culture. It doesn't matter if you don't have to speak the same language, you're still communicating this. And that's incredibly powerful to think about. It's a universal language.
Yeah.
It's just, okay.
I have had the same translator in Germany for 31 years now. And she's the one who taught me about the frozen hand gesture. So her name was Gabi. So I would be here and I'd say something in English and she would translate it in German. And about our second or third year, we took a break and she said, you're hanging me out to dry in there. And I went, what are you talking about? She goes, you gesture all you want, and then you put your hand at your side, and I start gesturing. They're not paying attention to me. So we did an experiment. Whatever I said, the last thing I said, I would freeze the hand. She would translate and realize, holy cow, that frozen hand held everyone. Cross-cultural.
So interesting. Wow. Yeah. Now, another thing you said, and that was very interesting, still on values, in one of your videos, was that 90% of people will choose to work with someone who shares the same values as they do, even though their styles are completely different. I found that fascinating, and yet at the same time, not surprising. But I want to hear your take on that. Why do you think that is?
It's more the core. So the deeper in you go, the more you have sustainability, longevity. So if you would, be sensitive when you take Myers-Briggs, Strength Finder. Those are DISC. They're all wonderful. But you got to figure out what level are they going to. Because sometimes they'll go to style level instead of value level. Now they overlap like crazy. But what you're referring to is when we ask people, would you rather have compatibility, same values, and have differences in terms of style, and you have to work at that? Or would you rather have same styles, and you have to work at incompatibility on values? Just live with someone. Which one do you want?
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say. I think some people get into relationships because they feel comfort and familiarity with the person's style, and yet they're not going deep enough to really find the core values. And then months on down the line, whenever they can't figure out why they can't stand each other and they're breaking up, you know, it's like, well, you never really explored each other's values. And I found that I can reference past relationships, but I can also, when I'm talking to people, friends or acquaintances who are complaining about these things, it's like, it's really about the values. Yeah. Now you did something interesting. You talked about appearance, and you went into not like, I thought you were going to go into like clothing appearance, but you go into like actual facial features, which are pretty much like you're born with. You can't really change that unless you, I guess, use cosmetic surgery. Yeah. So I was just curious how, and just kind of give people watching an example of what you mean by that. So how would you classify my appearance?
I'd love to. Thank you for asking that. I'm going to break away from looking at the camera to look at you, if I may. So anytime you have a narrow face, you're going to be seen as more credible than approachable in the Western world. Every time you have a wider face, you're going to be seen as more approachable. If you have small opening on the eyes, now think of Asiatic people, you're going to be seen as more credible, but not as friendly. If you have a small lip, small lips are credible, big lips are approachable. So you have all kinds of facial things in the Western world that I'm going, really? So people watching is perfectly okay. We form first impressions within 40 seconds. Everything is okay as long as you realize it's one of the outside circles, then you're okay. So you have a balance in that your eyes are a little bit bigger opening than the average, but you have a smaller, thinner face. So now anytime you get a balance between the 5 categories of facial, throw it away. Unless you have one feature that is unbelievably pronounced, then that feature is what carries everyone's impression of you.
Okay, so I think you might have just answered my next question, which was I was going to, after getting the analysis on my appearance, is maybe what recommendations you would give for me in communication. But if you're saying that I have a balance, then it doesn't really matter. Is that what?
So then you go to the next one. You go to behavior. So you have a more guttural voice than I do. The more guttural the voice, the more you're credible. The higher pitched, the more you're approachable. So you have a guttural. So you're going to find that you'll come across initially, first impression, as being credible, much more than approachable. So all we have to do on our behavior level is just take our head and tilt it. Because a straight head is credible, a tilted head is approachable.
So so are you recommending to really try to go for a balance of the two? Go for a balance. I guess it all depends too on what kind of circumstances you're in. Since I kind of have more on the natural side, a more credible appearance also with my voice, I should also look at ways, and if I want the option to be more approachable, do things like that, like tilt the head and maybe raise my pitch up a little bit if I want to be more approachable. Is that what you're saying?
Agree, but let's do this. So anyone that's watching this, if you would, gather together a couple of people that are both gender, male and female, and then ask them to put their hands on their hips. What you'll find is women will bend their wrists when they're touching. Men will keep their wrists straight. So that goes in terms of if I gesture out and I keep my elbow bent, I'm more approachable, just like the bent of the wrist, the bent of the elbow, the bent of anything that is a bend is automatically seen as being approachable. Anything that is straight is automatically seen as credible. So weight distribution. Men tend to stand with the weight on both feet. Women tend to stand with weight on one leg more than the other. So if your outcome is to come across as extremely credible and you have the looks of being highly credible, don't talk. Try not to talk for 2 minutes so that they can cement an impression in their mind. If you have an appearance that is highly credible and you want to have a conversation dialogue, you better switch to your behavior right away. You've got to compensate somewhere. Go to the next circle. Go to the next circle. So, you're not fixed. So you have to figure out your circles of communication.
Yeah, I can see how it's important to kind of sort of understand what you do naturally. And then I think people often think, well, if you have to stick to what's natural because otherwise you're being insincere, and I don't agree with that at all. I think it's more like having the choice to fit the circumstance, fit your behavior to the circumstance. It doesn't mean that we're being insincere, and I think that's probably one of the negative reputations that NLP gets is like this idea that there's some truth to it because I've met people who are very insincere and they kind of check all the boxes of communication. But nothing can beat sincere, congruent communication. And I heard something interesting. Are you familiar with Sam Harris, the neuroscientist?
No, not him.
He dabbles in politics as far as political commentary, and he does a lot of debating. And he's a humanist, and he's a very, very interesting guy. But he said something really interesting. He said, humans' intuition about just about everything is wrong, except for one thing. Our intuition about other people seems to be almost always right. Like if somebody gives you an uneasy feeling, there's something there that you picked up unconsciously. You couldn't explain it. You don't know what it is. The only thing you can say, well, it's an intuition. And he was saying that when it comes to, it's like probably, the millions of years of evolution has taught us, what's dangerous, what's not. And we can just tell just by very simple, very small things that fly right past the conscious mind when something's not right or when something is right. When someone seems like, you've met people before where you just kind of hit it off right away. And so it's like, what creates that? And it's these nonverbals for sure that are doing it.
Yeah. If you go into the second floor of the House of Communication and you're looking at nonverbals, there's 4 categories. We have, what do you do with your eyes, especially eye contact, facial expressiveness, your voice, your body, and your breathing. If you look at those, the breathing is the most important one. But it's hard to teach people breathing, so we tend to teach the other 3. If you want to come across as sincere, authentic, real, number 1, is it short-term or long-term relationships? And that's where we go back to the values versus styles. Because if you are who you are and you're real, you're going to breathe low. It's when someone breathes high. That's what you really are watching for. So you're going to find that if someone is tense, their face, their voice, and their body reflect what's going on with their breathing. So then the question is, when you start becoming a communicator, no matter what age, 7, 8 years old, what you're doing is you're trying to be authentic and real. And the big word is congruent. So does my face, my voice, my body, and my breathing with what I'm saying all fit? If they do, you're fine. If they don't fit, then you're back to, and thank you for mentioning Harris, I'll look him up, is Malcolm Gladwell's book, Meeting a Stranger, where he talks about first impression, how authentic and how real are they? Well, one of the things you're going to find is when you are learning communication, you want to be authentic, real, sincere. But the art level is to be systematically incongruent. Example, if I'm a pilot on a plane and I've been trained at being authentic and I look at the screen and I have incoming information, I could go, holy shit, we're in trouble. Better announce, everybody get ready, get ready. Well, that's not artistic. So you have to learn how, after you know how to be completely congruent, how to be systematically incongruent. So the pilot is trained, and usually most airlines, the last test you take, the people that are testing you are in a separate room. They can't see you, and they listen to you. Can you say with confidence, put on your seatbelt, we have some turbulence ahead. But notice how I had to pause. Put on your seatbelt, we have turbulence ahead. So you've got to learn how to breathe. And breathing is almost always based on pausing and breathing low instead of high.
And I think that also feeds into what I was saying before about people thinking, well, the way I naturally communicate is the only sincere way. And it's really not, because the pilot might be experiencing fear, but he wants to communicate, we're going to do our best. So, you know, you're in good hands, that sort of thing. So it's a difference also, you know, it's like there's one thing that I'm feeling and there's one thing that I want. You know, I might feel like something is impossible that I really, really want.
Right.
And so I use that desire to overcome that and go after it and get it. So yeah, it goes back to that. I mean, communication is, well, what do you want to communicate? You know, you might not be feeling it, but what do you want to communicate and how do you want to communicate it? So I think that's where the sincerity goes too, because if you don't take that into consideration, then in a sense, you're somewhat being incongruent and insincere if you don't communicate what you want to say. You're
not doing your job.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And communication, I also want to say that, I mean, as far as success goes, and success defined however you're defining that, just a matter of being fulfilled and getting what you want. The one single factor that they can definitely say across the board that all great successful people have is the ability to communicate. And that's on multiple levels, and you've already named several levels already. So yeah, I mean, it just never ends. It's like I don't know, a compounding rabbit hole of different levels,
right?
And which is all the more reason why we should just jump in and start learning this right away and just see where it takes us.
Yeah.
Yes, and that leads me to my last question, which is, there's always different ways of learning different things. There's different ways of learning NLP. Man, there are so many different ways to learn a language, as I'm finding. There's so many different theories. There's so many different practices, you know. But for you, when it comes to developing that sensitivity to nonverbal communication, when it comes to developing that sort of command over nonverbal communication, what, in your mind, what is the best way to learn that and practice it and really get it down so that you live it?
If you want to be successful, and we're going back to longevity, please make sure that your ethical development is always ahead of your technique development. Because if you let that technique get on top of your ethics, you're going to have short-term success, but I don't think you're going to have long-term success. At least that's how I view people.
That's an interesting point. I think you're right. I think people get sometimes so good, and then they start to kind of take that for granted, feel entitled, and get into more hubris.
Yes.
And nobody likes that, and then that repels people. But more on I guess more of a practical level, like if people were wanting to get started on this path of really learning nonverbal communication with the idea of, they have the rest of their lives to master it.
Right.
Where would you tell them to jump in? What would you tell them to start doing? What are some habits that they would want to practice every single day?
Watch people on YouTube. Turn off the sound. Watch people you say, I admire that person. Turn off the sound and just watch them. Then if you want to get really good, take and cover a part of it so you only can see, say, their face, and you can't see anything below, and just study it. And when we say study, 3 minutes maximum. Just see the 3 minutes over and over, even of yourself. Then take and cover up so you can't see the face. Now watch the hands. So break it apart into what does the face look like? What's the voice like? So now have the camera go and be listening to it, but don't look at it. Now listen to the voice. When does it go up and go down? Can you take your hand and go up and down with it? One of the things we do in our trainings when we have people that have taken the course before and they come back, we welcome them to what's called the process level. It's got to be a course of 4 days or more. And what we do is we meet with them 1 hour before we start. They're joined together as two people that are graduates. In the morning, they make sure that one of them is in charge of time and the other one closes their eyes and just listen. Now you've taken away 65% of your incoming information, which is through your eyes. When does the trainer, the presenter, go up and go down? Was there a movement of a noise somewhere in the room? How did the person in charge respond to that? Was it incorporated? Was it acknowledged? Did other people turn and look? Were they jarred by it? So now you get all of the auditory that you can. Then you then do in the afternoon the same thing again. 5 minutes in the morning, 5 minutes in the afternoon, switch. And sometimes we actually take 4 people and they come up on the stage and they're facing the audience. I'm talking to the audience. They find a spot on the back wall and they have to now work on the peripheral. Can they actually see how far and how wide? And it's amazing that you're going to find that just like NLP teaches, every mental state is supported by a physical state. So if I have my head sideways and it's not perpendicular to my shoulders, so it's sideways, I cannot see as well as if I'm perpendicular. So I trained myself initially for the first 2 years of presenting. Whenever I turned, I made sure I turned my whole body. Now, it was very stoic, it was very robotic, but this is how I do my flip charts, and I'd come back around. So I made sure I stayed perpendicular. The head was perpendicular to the shoulders at all times, and it was amazing how different it was.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can certainly vouch for videoing yourself to learn communication better. I hear, I've recommended that to people from time to time, and they say, well, I don't like looking at myself. And it's like, well, everybody else has to look at you. So, it behooves you to learn how to do that. And when I first started my YouTube channel, I was doing a video every single day. I was shooting it, and not only was I shooting it, I was also editing it. And it takes, I don't know, 5 to 6 times as long to edit than it does to actually shoot the video. So I had to watch all of my mistakes repeatedly every single day for hours a day for 8 months, where I did a video every single day, and then I cut back to like three videos a week. Man, that will teach you very quickly what you look like to everybody else. And that's really what communication is. It's understanding how are people perceiving you. It's more important to understand that in communication. A lot of people say, well, I didn't intend that. And it's like, well, that doesn't matter. People are perceiving that's your communication. That's what it means.
Yeah. If you want to add to that, because I totally support if you want to do accelerated learning, watch yourself on tape. But what I would recommend is you want to watch yourself at a 45-degree angle. Because when you watch yourself on your screen and you're making eyeballs with yourself, that's when you get too associated.
Interesting.
Whereas if you do a 45 or even a 90, you'll see lots of kind of movement and you realize what's going on in terms of my timing, but I'm not as associated.
Interesting. Well, all of my videos are recorded with me looking directly at the camera. I have to go back and redo everything now. All right. So I take it that because of COVID, you haven't been doing any live trainings, but are you going to go back to that when this whole thing is over with?
I'm ready.
Okay. And where do you normally do them? You're in Oregon, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So do you normally do them right there?
Across the river in Vancouver, Washington.
Oh, you're in Washington. Okay. So I guess we can look forward to that. In the meantime, we've got your videos, and I thought I saw. Do you have a book?
We have plenty of books.
Okay, we got one.
We have 14 books. I just give you a couple, if I may. This is the one in terms of nonverbals, and this is the second floor of the House of Communication. Breaks it apart into 21 different patterns, and it's a little bit like maybe the chords on a piano, the keys. You have those 21, you can make up any song you want. The other one we'd recommend is if you want to do group dynamics, we'd recommend this one. Now, intentionally, they're McDonald's golden arches. Yes, I kept the same nonverbals because they're cousins. So this is the third floor group dynamics. This is the third floor, 2 people instead of 1. You see the dog and the cat on it. So we have a different book for each of the different sections of the House of Communication, just because we got to specialize. My biggest thing that I hope that I can entice some people to join is that we're going to launch eventually, hopefully in the year 2021, what's called perception. And we're going to teach you how to see what is going on with accuracy instead of hallucinations. We're going to teach you know when to trust your gut and when you can't trust your gut. So it's called MAGIC, in case you're wondering. MAGIC stands for Micheal and Gail's, my wife's name, International Community. It's just the art of perception.
Well, would you come back on when you launch that?
I'd love to.
That'd be wonderful. And and by the way, I've asked your brother twice to come on. He's turned me down both times. So maybe you can put in a good word for me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for doing this interview. Like I said, you've been on my list for a while, and when this whole thing is over with, I hope to be joining you in a training soon. Yeah, I'd love to come. And so really appreciate it. And yeah, we'd love to have you back sometime.
Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed that deep dive into what is nonverbal communication and what it is exactly that Micheal Grinder does. And like I said at the beginning of this video, if you want to go deeper with this, if you want to cultivate that ability, if you want to cultivate that sense of nonverbal communication skills where you can spot what it means, what it is, how to use it, in the description right here down below, click that link and you will get a free 30-day sensory acuity and calibration training. If you like this video, make sure you give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe by hitting that subscribe button and clicking the bell so you'll be notified when I put new videos out. And last but not least, if you can think of a friend or a family member who would benefit from this video, make sure you share it with them. Take care.